Okay, so a ceremonial welcome to today's session of Entrusted with Uncertainty. I welcome the seen and unseen ones. I welcome land and waters, winds and stone, fungi and ancestors, microbes and memories. I welcome grief. I welcome tenderness. I welcome shame. I welcome silence, and I welcome to the joy that arrives in the cracks. A welcome to the tension that reminds us we are still alive. A, a welcome to all that may resist being that a welcome to all that may resist being welcome, but still shows up. We begin by acknowledging that we do not live in an era of change. We live in a change of eras, an unraveling, an invitation, a rupture where threads of modernity fray and something else might breathe through. We have not come here to fix, to optimize, or to tidy the mess. We have come here to sit in it, to feel the weight of our inheritance, to listen to the teachings in what hurts, to trace the hum of life beneath the rubble, to become compost for what comes next. This is not, okay, this is not a course, it is not content to consume. This is a ceremony, this is a cauldron, this is trembling ground. We are not gathering as experts, we are gathering as entangled beings, as threads, as, as threads in Earth's metabolism, as those willing to touch a raw nerve of collapse without flinching, or at least without fleeing. We call in capacities that will carry us emotional sobriety, to stay present with discomfort without needing resolution, relational maturity, to witness without fixing, to engage without overpowering, intellectual discernment, to hold paradox without simplifying it, accountability to the more than human and not yet born, to remember we are not alone. We honor the spirits of deschooling, grief, and eros, not as lofty concepts, but as wise, messy companions who will walk with us. Grief as the gatekeeper of honesty, eros, the pulse of aliveness beyond consumption, and deschooling, the courage to unlearn the habits of certainty and separability. This gathering is an invitation to breathe with land beneath you, right now, to place your feet or your heart in relationship with the place that holds you, to listen for what is already speaking through the silence. We enter this container not as owners or managers of our learning. We enter as composters, as the ones being composted. So let the edges fray, let the tears rise, let your mind not grasp but wonder, let your body not brace but open, let your questions spiral and sprawl and contradict and shimmer. This is a space of reverent irreverence, for seriousness that laughs, for surrender that does not collapse, for inquiry that touches the sacred without needing to define it. Let the work begin. Let it be difficult, joyful, slow, erotic, excruciating, and alive. And let us be entrusted with uncertainty. Just take a moment to breathe. However, if you best feel comfortable for you to arrive in this space, maybe like 3, 4, 5 deep, slow, or even shallow breaths. Okay. So for this session, uh, Akilah and I spoke about possibly like opening with a bit of a chit chat between us two. And then also like I think there's a also invitation. The chit chat is like permeable, so it's not like locked. or boxed in any sort of shape or way. So if there's questions, contributions, there's we invite in all of that there. And if there's a need just to witness, that's also just uh, yeah. I'm not sure, Akilah, do you feel called to welcome yourself in the space, name, say, oof, I don't think we can hear you.
Let's see. What about now? Okay. All right. So if it gets noisy, let me know because apparently these are not going to be used today. Um, Peace, everybody. So good to be here. Really grateful for the invitation to be in spaces where we're not fixing or solving, but doing all of the unraveling and the beautiful type of deschooling work that I continue to be called into and also benefit so much from. So thank you all so much for being part of it too. Um, there's something I wrote down that I often try to find a grounding statement for myself before I'm part of any container, and I often just say it to myself. But this one I'll say out loud. It says, I'm not here to lead or teach, just to witness, to wonder, to grieve with everybody else here, especially the grief that isn't about death, but still demands some level of burial. And the second thing is that I use this word, kananapo, as Vani is familiar with. It's a Jamaican patois word that probably has a West African origin story that I don't know in my conscious mind. But that is the word that I use for non-body death, right? For the deaths of endings of other kinds of sense of belonging, of dreams, of identity, of ways of being. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know you all have had from my chat with Vani, I know that you all have had some levels of conversation about non-body death. And that's really my jam right now. That's what's just turning me every which way but loose. So I just wanted to name those things. And I'm Akilah. I am here on Muskogee Creek unceded territories in so-called Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Yeah, I'll start there.
Saying, saying big up and welcome. And as the people say in Brazil, where I'm connecting from in Bahia, at Institute Ethno, massive abraços to you in this container. Uh, I think to orientate us in the space there, and probably to orientate us all, um, that we began this journey sort of doing a deep dive in understanding the waters in which we swim, which is sort of this what Al-Nur invited us to conceptualize, to at least be with, not necessarily conceptualize, because conceptualize is not a good word, but to be with this idea of this like ancient, new, present story of uh, the colonial mind and sort of how it relates to certainty. And Manish joined us also thereafter, inviting sort of the trickster element, and also just doing a deep dive in sort of the education part of it. Uh, and how sort of I love the phrase that was brought about, is the pretending that we're all doing, that the system is doing, that everybody who's promising solutions, everybody who's promising whatever they're promising with like a great amount of certainty, it's just a pretend. And I was actually reminded by forces human and more than human of like the childishness, the trickster, the playfulness of uncertainty. Uh, and I think out of one of our containers, and just want to also open up. If anybody feels like I'm missing something of this, something that needs to be named from maybe our containers in the integration or metabolizing sessions, that anyone would like to surface at any point, also inviting that, doing that. And I think I'll start by also naming that. in our containers, the smaller, not the smaller, but the stabilizing containers. There was a naming of of this pretending and the many layers of pretending. I think one that stood out for me last time was sort of the whole health, pretending to be healthy, uh, pretending, and how sort of like even the pretense of like the system inviting us to be healthy is actually just inviting us to be functional within capitalism, in be functional within a form of certainty that is not really that certain. That like getting back to work is of utmost importance. So being healthy got nothing to do with sort of this holistic idea of healthy, but sort of just how best you can function. There were some big bars that would drop some very juicy golden nuggets that are still sort of playing around in my body, in my brain, in my chest, in my toes, in my feet. And today, and what was named a lot through these past two sessions, and also the two big information sessions, download sessions, and then also the two metabolizing sessions, was this naming of grief and death as we feel the need, and I name for myself maybe, so I use this word we in the African way of looking at myself as a plural being. Um, there's a need, we we named a need to be able to disconnect, or at least create space between the certainty that 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 we've been promised, that is this pretending, and with this moving away from the certainty, there is death, there's a dying, there's grief, there's grief, there's grief. I'm gonna say it one more time. There's grief. um. So yeah,
Yes, there is.
I'm so grateful for you to be here with us, to be able to journey into this thematic, into this territory, into this fauna and flora of grief. Uh, and yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
pause there.
I love what you said about the pretending. I was part of a group and we met in 2019 for the first time. And one of the facilitators of that, her name is Sarah, she called our list of things to do a pretender, like instead of an agenda. And I liked that very much. Right? I liked that very much because it was immediately it just took some of the pressure off, right? Of this idea that we were going to accomplish this amount of things for sure. And somehow that we had this specific marker of what needed to be done in order for the experience to be valuable, right? So I really like that pretender thing. And I feel like it's so much what y'all have already felt into that premise of an agenda is something we carry across the board. I'm a longtime unschooler and I think about curricula in a similar way, except it's really violent also because it's not only pretend. When I think about pretend, it has like a playful component and a childlike component. But this type of pretend is like put on your military uniform and pretend that the people you're going to see are the bad guys and you're the good guys. And like it's that kind of pretend that costs so much more than my imagination. And and I think so much of what we do in the space of grieving, which is a world that I'm really called into in so many layers now, that's also a big pretend space where we pretend we're okay, and where we pretend that something we experienced is not that big of a deal, or something someone else experienced is not that big of a deal. Because when things are a big deal, then there's ceremony and ritual and process for it. If you fail a class, then there is a process to remediate and blah, blah, blah. When a person is sick, there is a person that goes and they press the buttons and read the books and they do the things. But when we have all these other types of grief and loss, that's not only about a person dying, then we pretend that we're fine and we pretend that it's just all about change and we pretend that, if my grandmother can go through this much, then I can go through this much. There's just so much harmful pretend and so much pretend clarity and certainty and these sort of things. So I'm really grateful to be in a conversation where one, we're willing to name that we are also pretenders, and that maybe that's something that we're not willing to keep as true. We're also willing to investigate that. What about if I don't pretend in this little thing? What about if I don't pretend here? And just feeling into the education of not pretending. Crying, for example, for me is like a simple low-hanging fruit way of practicing my not pretending, to cry when I want to cry, instead of pretending that there's a certain time that one is to cry and then there's a certain time that one should not cry. So just little things like that that help to push back against the premise that we are all okay. And if we just follow the plan, then we will continue to be okay. And when there's a problem, it's because we deviated from the plan or the curriculum. We just need to get back on it and we'll be okay again, right? You know? Yeah.
Hmm. I mean, inviting a sense of slowness as what you share lands and reverberates.
Yeah.
Hmm. This, just to name and to play with this idea of this pretending, something that was shared uh, with us in the first session by Al Noor, and also named in some of the resources that is available to us in this container, is sort of this idea that in this tea of pretending that is ancient and has been around for quite some time, there's this, we've been steeped in it for such a long time, and this raw, what feels very raw and what feels very scary is this not pretending. If my grandmother has been pretending, if my grandmother's grandmother has been pretending in certain elements, and now all of a sudden I wake up to the reality that they've been pretending, what the fuck? Sorry for the language, but what the fuck? Is that like I feel so much tension in my body with I'm not sure if it's responsibility of that knowing, uh, but the field, the ecology of that environment right there of of beginning to first of all just become aware of this in steep this in this yeah being the tea bag that has been steeped in this tea for so long, and then what, like, yeah, the movement or the what's the opposite of steeping? I don't know, maybe someone can help me. I don't know what's the opposite of steeping, or maybe there is no opposite of steeping. Maybe it's just to take the tea bag out and put it in something else, put it in a different, yeah. I don't know, I don't know,
Yeah,
I don't
maybe there
know.
are many ways to unsteep the tea or have the opposite, probably multiple opposites. Yeah.
See, I just feel so much there in that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Same, because even the very premise that I may not be the one to have realized it. Maybe so did my grandmother and my grandmother's grandfather and then her grandfather before her. Maybe everyone has had their multiple experiences with realizing it, but whatever their realities were and whatever the prioritized realities were, made it necessary that they continued to pretend. Because that was, for example, when I think about uh, being a Jamaican with the British colonial cloud that remains even after the island has been freed, is still there's a lot of pretend allegiance to the queen, for example, pretend allegiance to what was culturally normal for us from the British aspect, but not at all from the African or Native Indigenous aspects, right? How we talk. I was visiting my grandmother, who's 83. I think she's 83 now. And I was visiting her a few weeks ago, and we went out. It's my father's mom. We went to dinner, and I was saying something to my dad, and I said it in patois. And my grandmother jokingly said to my dad, "You need to teach her how to talk." And it was a joke, but not really. It was because it was like, well, obviously we would speak the Queen's English because we know, as if like we're pretending like we wouldn't understand each other if we were just talking patois. And that's an example. Grandma is very clear of the difference. She knows even a different type of patois than I know, being raised in a very different part of the island, by elders. And still there's a way where it's like the sense of safety that came with the pretending we carry, even if the conditions are different, even if there's nobody there that's gonna wrap my knuckles with a ruler, like when I was in primary school. Nobody's gonna do that to grandma, nobody's gonna do that to me, but she's still pretending because she started pretending because that's what made her safe. And then that pretending got carried on, right? So there's so many elements of what liberation looks like from the pretending, and whether or not we even recognize we're pretending. And when we do we feel safe enough, brave enough, whatever enough to stop? Yeah.
Akilah, what tea are you sipping on?
I'm sipping on a mint, a peppermint tea with some ginger and a little
Uh-huh.
brown sugar and a little cinnamon.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about the idea of like uh what type of like tea, what type of tea do we sip on in this moment of that awareness that that which kept us once safe is not keeping us once no more, no longer safe. And I'm thinking about what type of herbs would we be able to remember to conjure up or put together in this tea to be able to drink together in these moments of uh yeah, awareness. Uh, and also, is this the type of tea that we're gonna have with hot water? Is it the type of tea that we're gonna leave to chill, to sit a bit, And like, how long do we steep? I've been loving this idea of taking these processes and giving them a body of ritual, and tea seems to be quite a beautiful ritual. I'm a tea person myself. I don't got any tea on me right now, which is probably part of my problem. Not problem, but like maybe what would make me feel a bit more better right now. Uh, yeah, I'm thinking about like a tea ritual of what herbs, not necessarily like physical actual herbs, but maybe also physical actual herbs in some cosmovision. But yeah, I'm thinking about like just like yeah, what 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 tea, and is there a need for tea in that moment of awareness? Uh, yeah, I'm not sure if it's a question or what I'm doing right now, but I'm offering this as a contemplation. And it's open up to anyone to answer or to anyone to contribute to. Big up Pau and Ulrich, oh yeah, and Zoe and Marian. Now, is there like anybody in the space that would like to say something, drop a bar, drop something in the chat.
I I want to react a little to the words of Akilah because as a member of Yala of this Latin American continent, it is, I think, one of the griefs that I carry the most and have been normalized in the whole subcontinent, I will say, is this idea of being defeated. No, we think liberation, like, but we pretend that we are civilized modern people, and so we are somehow building the conditions for defeat. Because if we want to liberate from the colonizers with the tools and the mental framework of the colonizers, and we are afraid of reconnect with our own ways of living this land, no? So that's something that it's a permanent grief that is also very viciously coming back into liberation movements in America Latina, in Latin America.
I can, just since we're unmuted, I've been steeping myself in the tea of Akilah's podcast the last 24 hours. Really, yeah, it's been a big grief weekend, I would say. And I think if we were gonna choose a new tea to steep in, it should be a tea that helps us feel. Because I think that, like, part of the pretending for me anyway, and this is after our metabolization session last week that like stayed with me a lot, and even the Manish session where we talked about comfort, because like we were talking about the role of comfort in certainty, you know, like we want to stay comfortable so we don't take the risk to not pretend, you know. And I think the grief that feels like most alive for me right now is recognizing like these destructive patterns, mostly related to overdoing, right? Like being compulsively a doer and feeling like my self-worth only comes from there. But then like being like, okay, no, that's not fucking true, but not being able to like change it. And I'm just feeling so much anger and grief and frustration about that these last few days. So I'm just trying to stay with that feeling. I think that's what I am working on right now. And I'm really thankful for the insights that you brought, Akilah, around work. This morning I listened to the work podcast, but also like the identity stuff also feels like really big right now, and like not being the person who never disappoints anybody feels like it's really big. I just had like a great healing conversation with a friend of mine where we were able to say like, you disappointed me, and he was able to say, you disappointed me, and it was beautiful. Like, but then to stay with the feeling and not like jump into the whatever other shit I do. I don't even know.
Thank you, Aaron and Yo-Yo. I'm not sure before maybe Akira reacts. Did I see Paul or Isabel? You guys want to say something? Okay, be good, be good.
Well, maybe I do actually have the intention to talk. So just when Yayo was talking, is that correct, the name? I'm not sure. When you were talking, it just reminds me so much. A couple of days ago, I was having a conversation with Ethan. It's the son. It's our son, and he said to me, we were talking about the Spanish as a language, and he said, "But mommy, you're where you are from, and I'm from Colombia. You were colonized by the Spanish." the Spanish country? And I said, yes, we were. And he said, so what's actually the language you speak? And I said, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure what's the language that my ancestors spoke, even though my great-grandmother was indigenous from the area, from that specific area. And I think at that moment I started to cry, and I felt so much that inside me, that who I don't know, in that moment it came to me, that really question, that who am I if I don't even speak the language of my ancestors? I speak the language of the colonizers. So, yeah, it has been sitting with me, that really deep feeling of this is one part of me that I really don't know, and I do not know how to connect with. How do you go back into connecting with that part? And yeah, so yes, I just wanted to share that. Thank you for listening.
Isabella, I loved what you said about the who am I if I ... That's a powerful grief tending prompt, right? Even just that, who am I if I do this, or who am I if I don't do this, or who am I since I do this, or who am I since I no longer do this, or who would I be if I stopped doing this or started doing this? It's such a powerful prompt. And I can so relate to what you said about language. You know, right in front of me, I have one of my favorite songs, which is in Spanish, El Desierto. And I have a grief altar in my bedroom, and I always have some of my Spanish to English index cards on there because I grieve the reality that my languaging is limited because of resources and coloniality and all of these different things. And I grieve not being able to just hear another language and take it in, that I believe an ancient part of me and what I come from did quite naturally. Because when we want to learn and when there isn't a certain level of pressure, we do. So this, even where I'm from, there isn't one specific language, like probably many of us. There were multiple languages that were spoken by multiple people who were native to that space, and then others who got there because they wanted to be there, and then that language infused. And so there's so much grief work that is connected to the history of language and the history of us, and the sense of, I'll say limitation. That's what it shows up to me, like a type of limitation and even a type of shame that I feel around my limitations for embracing language, you know, not just like learning it to speak it, but the language which is always connected to culture, which is always connected to human and more than human kin. That feels like it's not accessible to me because of the situation that I was born into. And it feels connected to so much more than language. Yeah, so I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think it's a source of grief in so many spaces that I've been in. I'm a grief tender. I'm an out loud public grief tender. And so I'm part of a lot of circles where we are just leaning into our grief, becoming more familiar with and witnessing what our grief looks and feels like out loud, and learning to become witnesses of other people's grief. So I always say in a grief group, I'm not here for you. I'm here for your grief. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I don't even know you. But what I want to presence and be in service of is grief, because that's what I'm called into. And I feel that there is so much untended grief around that very thing of who am I if I don't, dot, 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 or who am I since I do, dot, dot, dot. And it's grief that we don't even acknowledge or value as grief, because I think to label something as grief is to give it a level of value, and a level of access to it. And I really appreciate that that's what I'm feeling here, especially as you name that, Isabel. Yeah.
Mm, mm, mm. I'm reverberating with this. To name it as grief is to give it a level of value. I think part of the colonial mind is also this utility of language that uh, hyperinflates certain ideas or words, and also what's the word? Devalues words. I think in the unschooling work, childish is one of those words that have been devalued. If I say uh, in the safety of our relationship, Akilah, I can say like, if I say, Akilah, you behaving childish, then automatically there's this sort of triggered response like, what do you mean childish? What do you mean child? So I'm loving just this idea of grief, which in the Western mind could be seen as something, and we spoke about this I think with Paul last week and with Annie as well, and I think Aaron, a few of us were there around this idea of health, and I mentioned that earlier. And grief is like a taboo. If you grieve, it's like something to get over quickly, something to move fast. There's a lot of language and culture in the colonial mindset. There's a lot of certainty in you moving quickly over grief, and there's even this pressure we put on ourselves, this embodiment of this coloniality to sort of work ourselves out of grief, not give it time, not give it value. So I love the naming of of giving it value. I saw Ulrika come on camera. What is? Would you want to share? Please feel free to unmute.
Hello. Hi. Well, this is a amazing topic. Yeah, it really gets discussed. Um, I've been a medical doctor that trained in South Africa, and I've been so enthused and passionate about finding this new medical model of self-healing and finding the words in the indigenous languages. Zilape in Zulu means heal yourself. And to see now of trying to convey this message to other South Africans, and it's just over medicated, how the doctors over medicate patients, how we are over medicating young people who have emotional problems, how there's no way that there is this in that sphere of healthcare. It doesn't exist. We don't have the languages in South Africa. We don't have the words to talk about these aspects. And now I find too, my daughter's brother is in such a state, trying to kill himself as a 28-year-old. And I'm just talking to him in this way, because you are my people, that bird's eye view of seeing how human is put together and how we are connected to each other. It's so healing. It's so healing. And tonight I'm just the grief of how to speak this into the new, how to make people feel safe enough to be able to let go of this mental constructs that has made us in South Africa so convinced of scarcity, so convinced of lack. It's yes, I don't know yet how. I don't know. But it's so, I feel that here in South Africa especially, we're so convinced of the separation. It's so hard to let the future call us. We all convinced that the past is there to predict the future. We don't feel that co-creation is us. So I'm grieving that at the moment.
So grateful for your sharing. And greetings to that young, beautiful face behind you.
Just put that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Ulrika, thank you. And everyone, thank you. I've turned on my mic, partly because I'm feeling quite emotional. And maybe that's a good time in this particular moment to share. And there are quite a few dots that have connected for me now in this last, how long have we been chatting? 40, 50 minutes or whatever. But as a fellow South African, I want to say I hear you on that. Like, it is I'm in KwaZulu-Natal, which has got some beautiful ancestral lands, some beautiful traditional knowledge, but overall, in terms of the settler colony that South Africa is, KZN is quite steeped. Talking about the tea bag in the water, it's very steeped in that. Certain echelons of society are steeped in that particular colonist mindset still, even now. I grew up here. That particular aspect of this province is part of the reason why I left KZN. And part of the reason why I found my way back here, aside from the fact that my family is still here, my parents are here, my partner's parents are here, so my children's grandparents are here, was to do with that over-medication that you're talking about. And this is an interesting reason why, how my story how I found this Entrusted with Uncertainty journey in the first place is because quite a few years ago now, but not that many years ago, we were living in Johannesburg, and sort of just shortly post-COVID hit a situation in which my eldest son, who is all children are geniuses. All children are highly sensitive. Some of them respond to contexts more in a more sensory way than others, and he happens to be one of those. And even though we were in an alternate mainstream education was never going to be the answer for us, partly because I did extremely well as an overachiever in that system and never found any nourishment. So that was my choice, but I realized very quickly that my eldest son certainly was never going to survive in that system anyway. And we hit a moment, even in an alternative education space, in which we had a sort of prognosis, not a diagnosis, but a prognosis from an OT, which was, quote unquote, this child will never learn in a group context without the help of drugs. At which point it was quite hard for me as a parent to say, well, firstly, you've picked the wrong person, but also we are all in extreme distress. This was post-COVID. Like Johannesburg was a difficult time, a place to be in. I mean, the world was a difficult place to be in. But in this process of trying to work out in my own distress how to exit this model of learning, which required very specific outcomes on a very specific timeline. A good friend of mine said to me, well, why do you need school at all? Like, why are you attached to this idea of school? And I said, well, because I can't do this on my own. Like, I don't think that I have the capacity right now to do this on my own, because the alternative that I saw at that time was homeschooling, which was certainly in a post-COVID Johannesburg, a very isolated space. And I couldn't have done that then. And she said to me, well, you know, there's this reimagined learning center. Why don't you get hold of Shevani? And so I then went down that sort of path, and didn't because of the post-COVID scenario, never sort of struck up a conversation with you, Shevani, but sort of read a lot of what you were writing at the time, read a lot from what Zakia Ismail was writing, and Akilah, you also were quite foundational in my sort of letting go of that concept of school as something that I needed. And this is where this post-colonial thing comes in. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but it's got to come. In the political sort of post-colonial under foundation, I realized that actually has been the foundation now moving forward. Now we are completely in a very unschooled situation in our lives. We've worked hard to make that possible. But what, even in times of great uncertainty, has made it possible for me to stay with that is that the sense that politically this is very important. And partly that comes from growing up in a family that was deeply affected by the trauma that resulted from parents having to go to war for the colonist mentality, actually. And I've carried a lot of shame in my life around that, like being a person not of color, but identifying deeply politically with people that are very different from me in upbringing, very different from me in worldview, and never really quite being able to understand why. And then having that strange conflict of, but this is my family, why do their politics feel so harmful, like painful to me? And then understanding that actually perhaps my path is to break that cycle. Maybe my generation's job is to break that cycle, but mainly because I'm able to bear witness to, and now at this time of my life as an adult, grieve all the losses that were incurred from people who ended up having to go to war as deeply sensitive people for ideologies that maybe never resonated with them, but they didn't have the support or the framework to even begin to understand what that even meant. It's still a very complex, complicated, fraught space in my own heart. But I'm offering it. And I'm offering it. And thank you for listening to me for a very long time.
Yo, big up that offer, big up that gift, those types, those containers. Hmm. And maybe want to invite us, before we continue, just to shake whatever feels the need to be shaken. Not necessarily in any fast movement, but definitely just to invite a movement of any sort. Uh, Also, just wanting to name the level of courage it takes to contemplate grief, to be with grief, to pull out the chair and pour that cup of tea for that long awaited grief, to open up that sense of hospitality for that which is wanting to be named in grief. So just wanting to send a massive shout out to the courage it takes just to be witnessed and to be witnessed. Healer
Yeah.
in the use of language that is, I don't know why the word tease has been used, but I can understand the magic of the word tease now. I was going to say I want to tease the word and thinking of Kananako in this moment of time. And I can maybe just share that the etymology of the word tease comes from, like, when there's a loose thread, like, yeah, perfect example. On the garment I'm wearing, there's this loose thread. And if I pull on this loose thread, it sort of unravels. Uh, so that is what it means to tease something, to pull it out. Um, so yeah, I'm wanting to tease Akilah, but in the non-schoolish way, in actually a very deep and sacred way. I want to tease this wisdom of Ulrich. Reminded me of the importance of words, and I think that's maybe also an ingredient or a library of ingredients that we can use to put in our tea, this new tea, is words and language. So I may want to tease the idea of Kananapo and the wisdom, the cosmology that it holds at this point in time.
Yeah, gladly. So I'll share, which if you've listened to the podcast, maybe you know this, but I'll do the super quick version. And I'm so grateful that the podcast, which is called What I Let Die, um, has been presenced here because it is, I always say what I know how to do. If I was gonna not pretend about what I do professionally or what I do out loud, it's struggle. That's what I do. I struggle out loud. That's it. That is it. Even when I'm trying to do something else, even if I don't necessarily want to right away, what I do is I struggle out loud. And I think that's one of the reasons that my ancestors and other healed energies trust me with words because because I know how to struggle out loud. I trust doing that. And Kananapo came from that. It's it's a word that for some Jamaicans in some of the parishes, they used it to basically sum up what happens when you had an expectation and an agreement. Yeah, like with one N, Ulrike, so Kananapo, Kananapo. So it's a word that means I expected it, we agreed upon it, and I still haven't seen it or experienced it. That's what it means. And they even have a thing that they will do like this. This is the signal for Kananapo to like pull your eye down, as in, I've been looking with my whole entire eye, and I still ain't seen it. Kananapo. So that's what the word means. And as I was feeling into it for this container, that I was part of called the Eyelid course, which is an acronym for I Let It Die. And Vani was part of that very first caravan. Thank you so much. Because I struggle out loud in community. That's the other piece. I had felt into and asked spirit for language around non-body death, because I knew that as I was moving through grief literacy and grief tending, and I also went to thanatology school where we study grief and loss and death and dying and bereavement. But I felt icky about how so much of it was super concentrated on the death of a person. It felt like so oppressive and so like it just ignored all these other types of ways that we experience death and like deep loss that lingered and impacted us in so many ways. So I kept asking for language around it. And I'm driving around in Covington, Georgia, and that's the word that came up. And so I WhatsApped my mom to say, Mom, because it's not a word that my grandmother used all the time. We just heard it a few times. So I reached out to my mom and was like, Mom, if I say kananapo to you, what do you think of? And then she was like, yeah, oh, mama used it for this and da da da. And I said, at first I was like, yeah, that's connected to it because it's the idea that as these beings, we have all these experiences with life and death, big L, big D, life and death, but there's also all these little d deaths and these little L lives, relationships we had that had a start date and an end date, aspects of our identity, aspects of as people's mother, I think about how many versions of my daughters have lived and died, and the ones that I grieved and the ones that I liked a little bit more than others, depending on which day you ask me, or all of these things, right? The history of my mother. My mother had me really young, and so I've known many versions of her that have died. I come from a super duper religious background. Big versions of Akilah also died when I detangled myself from religion and learned what my relationship with God's spirit self would be. Right, so this word Napo is meant to offer language for our capacity and our right and the skill that we have that's latent to recognize and acknowledge all these many things that live and die, and also to recognize that grief is how we savor loss. It's the opposite of that colonial mindset to rush past it, to go back into your productive self. To savor loss is an act of resistance. It is liberatory practice to say, I lost something, or someone I care about, or someone I know lost something, and that matters to me. It matters to me so much that I'm going to slow down. That's it. It doesn't mean I'm going to solve it. It doesn't mean I'm going to make them feel better. It doesn't mean I'm going to find the answer to whatever the hell. It just means that I see value in slowing down and allowing the reality of this sense of loss to linger and to tend to it in whatever ways I see fit, whether it's detailed ritual, whether it's to eulogize it. I talk a lot about eulogizing little d deaths. You were going to go to dinner with a friend and you were really looking forward to it and they canceled. That could feel like an insignificant thing, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe you really wanted to be with this friend, and maybe things have been tenuous and they reached out and it made you feel like, oh, shit, okay, we're good. And then they canceled, and then it brought up a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't even have anything to do with that friend, but it brought that stuff up anyway. When we recognize grief tending as a skill and not just like this feeling to rush past, when we savor it, then we say, oh, this is about rejection. This is about rejection. And there's a version of me, right, Annie? There's a version of me that's like, oh, I remember when I was rejected when I was 12, and that was so painful. And everyone, including me, told me to rush past it. But this version of me that's been in these containers knows different. And now this version of me can actually tend to that 12-year-old version and say, no, that's legit. And this person, thank you for canceling, because what you did was you brought me into the awareness that I feel some type of way about that and I'm grieving it. And maybe I'll write a little eulogy for that thing that happened when I was 12. And maybe I'll leave it on my dresser, or maybe I'll soak it in water until it dissipates, or maybe I'll burn it so that I've had some level of ritual and something to say, this happened, it mattered, and I feel it. Oftentimes, that's all grief allows, just to be able to say something happened and I feel it. And I'm not sure what I want to do with that, but something happened and I feel it. And that alone is grief tending. And that feeling of it can really offer portals of access to different ways to tend to the grief, not to heal it, not to fix it, but to impact our relationship with it. Sometimes it's just to take it off of our chest and to move it over to the side so that we could just walk shoulder to shoulder with it instead of feeling like, oh my God, people are coming over. I need to pretend that I'm fine, or I'm so past that now. I'm so much stronger. I'm healed. I sometimes feel like the word healing is harmful because it's not that we don't want some things to heal. Obviously we do, but not everything can heal. And also, what about that whole process of before we get to the miraculous healing that may or may not happen? Who am I, to Isabel's question, if I don't heal from this? Or who is this person I care about so much? How might I be in a different level of relationship with them if I'm not relying on them healing from something in order to be with them? Yeah. So Kananapo is just an offering of languaging for, that nuanced, layered experience of loss. Looking in the chat and appreciating so much of what's here, and also feeling into and appreciating what's here. The lack of rushing to say the words is such a beautiful offering. That's how it lands for me every time. And I really appreciate it.
Hello again. I I heard an expression the other day. I was about to type it into the chat, and then I thought better of it, because the expression was new level, same devil. But devil has a whole lot of connotations that that kind of don't go with what we are going with here. It's the new level part that really resonated with me, because I loved it because it kind of took a two-dimensional thing and turned it into a four-dimensional thing almost. Like, we come here we do these things, we feel like they're never over, like, oh my God, why am I coming up against this thing again? Do I need to grieve this again? And maybe the answer is yes. Not because we have to grieve it again, but because we're on this like journey of the cyclical spiral like journey. And so the devil part is just that stuff that we've all come here to do, and we do it until, well, maybe we don't do it until it's finished. Maybe it's never finished. I'm kind of leaning in that way myself, like it's never finished. We just keep doing it. We just do it on, we keep going on these spirals all the time. So it could have been one sentence in the chat and it was a whole many sentences here, but yeah, I love this space. I really do. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Lee. Yes. Mm.
Enjoying the space we're all in. However, I do see my sister Pao. How can I tease you a bit? Can I tease you to hear your voice in the space?
Okay, I'll try. Hello, everybody. I feel it's important to share with you what happened this week in my life because it's very related to all of us. Yeah, I'm grieving a lot. I'm in Uruguay right now. I had to travel. 1 week ago exactly, we were sharing in our circle. I don't know when everything started because there is not a beginning. It's a huge, long story. But there was this point, it's very interesting, where we have a partner, right, in Ecuador. What is her name, Giovanni?
In Ecuador.
Yeah, she said she's in Ecuador.
Andrea.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
she is. She was speaking and she was telling how in this last time she's been through a lot of grief because she faced the death of people around her and from her family and friends. And in the moment she said that, I was feeling like, it's been a time since I don't have this experience. And then suddenly kind of a breeze came into me with this idea of death is coming. And yeah, some minutes later, as we were sharing, my partner entered in the room and said that he received a call from Uruguay because we live in Bolivia. His brother killed himself exactly 1 week ago. Meanwhile, we were having this conversation. This was happening here in Uruguay. It was really crazy. So by the end of the circle, family found him and they called us. So in this very moment, I remember I wrote something here in the chat and I said, okay, thank you. I'm feeling you and I'm going to hold you these days because I was entering in a very huge and deep grief. It's really curious how all these things happen because, and this is something I've told Tabani many times, from the teachings of my ancestors in Bolivia, they always say that the future is something that we remember. we can remember the future, as everything is aligned and connected. We know what can come. We can feel it. We can be prepared for it. And it's really curious how 2 days before this happened, we started preparing, me and my partner, actually months ago, because I'm about to start studying thanatology. I have no idea why. There are no reasons. It's just something that I feel I have to do, right? So I started preparing myself. I have this beautiful connection with death, beautiful and mysterious connection with death. Since I was a girl, I used to be very connected with it, but I was afraid, because who wants to work with dead people? Who wants to work for death? We are so taught to fear and to reject and to escape from it. So, but my grandmother and my culture always taught me how beautiful and sacred death is. My grandma taught me just by dying. Her funeral and her death was amazing. And everything I learned in that episode in my life. And every time I remember, I learn more. So I started preparing myself for this moment, I think. And days before that, I started washing the clothing. I started preparing everything. One day before, I told my husband we should go and buy some winter clothing. He said, "Why?" I said, "I don't know, just go." And we bought a lot of things. And yeah, that afternoon when we received the news, we were ready. So we prepared everything and we just came to Uruguay. And we spent the whole day traveling and feeling how deep and mysterious grief can be, and how many ways you can feel it and explore it. And something I appreciate is that, as I am not part of this family, I mean, it was not my brother, right? So I experienced everything from a different place. And I was able to see the amazing gifts that death can bring. It was amazing. And I feel I received so many gifts from this soul that departed and who chose to live. And to make this transition. And I'm learning so much these days because, yeah, especially because family here don't like or practice any religion. Actually, they reject a lot the idea of religion or ceremony. So there was this empty space before the last moment. And yeah, we offered to make a tobacco blessing, and it was very beautiful. And I felt, and I had the honor to clean my brother-in-law's body with tobacco and sacred plants we brought from Bolivia and Peru, and to pray and to tell the stories I've heard so many times since I was a child about death, about what comes, about the 8 days that the souls walk through different worlds until they get to the new place where ancestors are waiting. And this was a beautiful moment when family had a chance to reconnect and breathe this new way of existence is experimenting. The new connection they will have with the soul, dealing with the absence of somebody, is really crazy. It's really beautiful. People here in Uruguay are very intense. So the intensity of their grief is so amazing. It's the same way they have a party and they dance and they scream, and now they are grieving in an intense way. And just being here and just listening, just holding, hugging, and making tea to help them sleep well is giving me the honor to be part of this. And yeah, I'm very grateful because it is so uncertain, but so beautiful. And I had no idea this could happen, but somehow I knew, somehow I was ready. And this brings this beautiful gift of what comes, what I want to do. And this service is very sacred. So I'm grateful because I feel like it's something I want to walk through and towards. Yeah, so I've been holding you all in my heart these days because in the middle of this pain, I was a vassal and I was holding all the time. And in some point, I was asking to myself, who's holding me? So I had to imagine you and, and all my brothers and sisters around the world who share this with me. And yeah, I feel this is beautiful that we can share. It's a complicity. And thank you for all of this. Halala.
Ayaya, ayaya. So, no, thank you for your generous offering, Pao. Hmm.
And if may I ask something, I have no idea what comes and what to do. But if there's anything you can share with me or suggest me, it will be a pleasure to listen.
Thank you for that. There's one, I love that you are drawn to thanatology. I mean, I hadn't even heard that word before I started to study it. I knew Thanos from something else, but not thanatology. I hadn't made that collaboration, that connection. Um, and I happened into it because I was actually in seminary. I found an actual interfaith, interspiritual seminary that wasn't just a disguised Christian space. It was actually all and none. But really, that journey was to lead me to thanatology because a year and a half, a year and a summer into seminary, I was moved into thanatology. And I wouldn't say that I chose it, not consciously, but that's what happened. And something that feels like it may be useful here that really shook me. I think this was from a teacher named Wilka Roig, who I think is now based in Mexico, though she's not from Mexico. And she, along with quite a few of the other people who came in to facilitate day-long sessions, she just rocked my world. And I highly recommend you look into Wilka's work. I'm going to put, in case, I'm going to put the spelling of her name here, Wilka Roig. And one of the things that Wilka said is that all death is good. There's no such thing as a bad death. And when she said that, I wanted to just like slam my computer shut. I was so offended and annoyed and like, "Dude, shut up." I was so done. It's like, what are you, yo, cha, just, I felt it in my entire body and especially in my throat. I kept wanting to unmute and be like, "Bah." Um, but I let it live and move. And I continued to listen eventually. And I just want to name that because essentially, and this is not really to explain it because I think it's its own sovereign, complete thing for anybody to play with however they see fit, that all death is good and no death is bad. What I do want to offer in my like excavation of that is how we are given or gifted, perhaps that's how I see it, gifted life and death at the very same time. That is one of the things we can be certain about. Like, definitively, we're born, and definitively, we die in terms of the body. That one feels irrefutable. I don't know anyone or of anyone who was born and didn't ever die, not in the physical, biological sense. So that gives me a type of anchoring that feels like safe enough to hold on to in the wild, wild world of thanatology. So that's one thing. So if it is given, is it then good? Is it inherently good because it's given at the same time as life? I don't know, but that's something to contemplate. It's a guarantee we get at the top of the hour. The other thing is in thanatology, and it is moving over into the medical world as well, we are reclaiming the organic, natural element of death by when someone dies by suicide, that's what we say. We say this person died by suicide. The language most of us are used to, myself included, is that someone killed themselves as if they, like they committed a crime. They did something that you're not supposed to do. But if we look at death as something that is organic as life, when someone has a baby, we're like, oh my God, that's great. Even if the circumstances of how that person got pregnant was horrific, generally across cultures and spaces, right, Paul? We're like, yeah, there's a baby is born. Yes, no matter the circumstance, the baby itself is good. And we're going to celebrate that and try to keep it alive. So no matter the circumstance of birth, and perhaps we can contemplate also, no matter the circumstance of death, the death has happened, and what has happened and what is the thing to lean into is one, that they died, not how they died, and also that they lived, right? That they are so much more than that they died. They lived, and they have stories we can tell, funny, good stories, and also shitty stories about the ways that they were not great to us, whatever, but they lived. They had a life, and their life ended, and that we, in our human form, in the tea that we are steeped in, hold on to this mythology that the good death is the one that happens when you get old and you are surrounded by people you love, and that all the other versions of it are bad, and that we really hope that doesn't happen. And I believe that this is a necessary contemplation because it is so messy. What do you mean a person who was violently murdered or tortured, or otherwise something horrific and unwanted and non-consensual happened to them? Is there a way to say those things? Yes, we say that's not good. We don't want that. We wouldn't want that for anybody. But is the death the thing to vilify? What is the cost of the vilifying of death? Because how can that not be tied to our judgment around life and who should live and how they get to live, or how they look when they live, or how they sound when they live? It's all this judgment about what we are okay with and what we are not okay with. But as nature, which we are, we know that nature gives and takes, and that timeline is whatever it is. The rains might come to a place that really needed rain and then cause flooding. But the water isn't bad. The rain isn't bad. And the contemplation here in the offering is neither is the death. So how someone died, if we remember ahead and also use the past, can become less important and less of an accusation. Oh, you killed yourself. You took your life. You took this thing that was given to you. Death was also given. And even when someone dies by suicide, we also contemplate whether or not we can actually call that a choice. Maybe they didn't feel they had a choice. Just like with unschooling, there's a vilification sometimes of, oh, you get to not choose school. Well, if my kid is going through a sense of torture there, did I have a choice? You know, it's just, to me, the tending to grief allows us not to necessarily land on one side and be like, oh my God, I'm correcting myself. It's not about what we ultimately do or say. It is to do it with the mindfulness and the contemplation of how organic death is, and that we are the ones with the mythology and the ideas that death is okay when it looks like this, but it's not okay when it comes like this, and that a person is a killer because they died in this particular way, or that a person died too soon, for example, when they die as a child. That's the mythology. Because in a way, it devalues, it says they didn't get to do enough with their life. Their name or whatever didn't matter. It didn't get to matter yet because they died so soon. When their death is a rich and vast and everlasting education. And so is whatever time they lived. And when we look at death in that different way, just like how I said with the podcast is what I let die, there's also what I let live. And oftentimes, what we can let live is informed by our mythology and our views and our refusal to accept that death is wild. It's wild, meaning we cannot predict when and how, or be attached to an idea that when you're 95 and you've accomplished things, that is when your death is good and you're surrounded by people you love. But otherwise, it's not.
Thank you. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you're definitely right. And it's so important to use new words and new narratives for these things that just happen. And yeah, for me, this understanding came in pandemia, in a moment where I started seeing so many people dying around me. And I remember very well, I was with COVID. There was this point that I felt I was dying. I couldn't breathe and I was with fever. And I remember one afternoon that I took my cell phone and I opened the Facebook. What a bad thing to do in COVID times and fever. and I opened Facebook, and a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine in my age, a young girl, died and just died that afternoon. And I had this crisis, and I went to sleep, and I was on fever. I had this situation. I still don't know yet what happened, but it was like a conversation with the Ahayu. Ahayu is a word in Bolivia that we use for the spirit of things, okay? The Ahayu of things. So I remember that when I woke up, it's like I had a conversation with the COVID, the high of COVID. And I asked a question. I asked this question of why this is happening. And when I opened my eyes, I had this idea, this clear idea that said, every spirit decides the moment. And everybody that departs, it's the decision of the spirit. I remember very well this idea when I opened my eyes. I didn't understand it very well, but it gave me this idea of it's fine. Every spirit is deciding the moment, and we are nobody to judge this. So this gave me so much peace, and of course it's helping in this moment, in a moment where everybody's judging or asking this question, why, and the regret and guilty and so many sensations I found and I felt, and the acceptance, and seeing this as something sacred, no matter how, no matter why. It's really beautiful. Of course, pain is there, but it's really beautiful. And I'm really grateful for this, because the more you feel gratitude, the more you can embrace the gifts of sacred death. Mm. Mm. Gracias. It's beautiful to share this with all of you.
Oh, inviting breath, inviting the wisdom of wind and air and all that it carries to move through you with breath or with a yawn. Mm. At this point in time, I want to give space and voice to those who haven't had a time or haven't had a moment to say anything yet. If you're probably feeling you shouldn't say something, you probably need to say something. Just teasing, just teasing. Yeah, I just want to give space to those who haven't spoken yet to take up some space.
Wow, thank you so much for all of your sharing and for that whole thread that we just unraveled together. And the last thing that you said, something like, the more you focus on gratitude, you can appreciate it and you don't need the answers. And I think that's where, like, we spend so much time focusing on finding the answers and finding the certainty. And with death, especially, like, no death. There's no way for us to have the answers around any death, like physical life or the little d deaths. And I think about what an equalizer grief is, because there's no amount of power or riches, like no amount of money gives you certainty around death and grief. And it's in that, like, slowing down and allowing that gratitude to bubble up through the grief that is a choice we can make. And Akilah, your practices that you've invited us to now for a little while, of tending to grief, to me has become the resistance work, right? The, like, I will choose to slow down and feel this, and I will choose to step out of the rush to sit with this, not look for answers, not find the hope. Like the quote, Shivani, you shared in the email for today was like the quote that I love about it. Like, it's like, we don't need to make sense of it. We don't need to tie it up in a little, like, sometimes it's just that we're holding the rot and we need to let go of it. We need to get it off our hands because it's not serving anything anymore. And so it's very colonialistic and capitalistic to try to make everything have meaning. And sometimes either there is no meaning or we don't need to know the meaning. And so that that grief practice is saying, like, I don't have to live this fast, and I don't have to keep moving forward without recognizing that, like, something has shifted, and it's not something to get to go away, right? Like, sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes we really need these practices to, like, sit down and tend to. And by engaging in the practices, we're modeling it for ourselves, for the young people in our lives who are watching us. We're inviting in for them to say, I lost my favorite red car and it mattered to me. And it's like, we often go so fast by those little deaths in our own lives that, of course, the young people in our life don't necessarily feel like they have the space to let that little red car be a big, big deal. And in creating rituals consciously, I have found now that, and I've practiced a lot since, I don't know, when did eyelids start? Last spring, so over a year. And realizing then, like, sometimes the rituals find me now, and sometimes I go to something. I went to a sound bath for the full moon last week, having no intentions to do anything but sit there. And I had this really big ball of anger that I've been holding, and resentment. And I knew that it could at some point become a portal. I also knew I wasn't necessarily ready yet. Like, I wanted to hold this ball of anger. It meant something to me. And somehow, like, in this process, I went to this place, and it was not about this ball of anger I was holding, but that ball of anger had gotten so intense that I realized in the moment also, like, I couldn't keep holding it. And so something alchemized in that moment internally without me controlling it, without me being the one to say. But because I had created this space and I've created this practice over time, the ritual found me, and I left that anger. It felt like it was like this flashbang of clarity, and then, like, this release of, like, it no longer even matters to me. And it was, again, just because that space was there, and this notion of, like, I don't have to rush it. I don't have to get rid of it so fast. But maybe when I find it, this, like, melty goo of corpse in my hands, now it's good to go.
Hi, thank you for sharing, all of you. Hearing you talking, but also listening to the podcast series, not the whole of the series, but quite a big part of it, I was realizing that I'm not sure which is my relation with death and grief, in a sense that I have been quite close in a quite few physical deaths from a quite young age of classmates, relatives, friends, or random people in free camping that it happened to be my holidays and a girl just fell off the cliff and I was holding her head like really close, my stepfather. And people, I mean, the people around me judging me that I'm quite distant from that and I'm not grieving enough, which I didn't feel correct, but on the same time, I could not prove. And listening to Akilah's podcast about like, insisting a bit more, at least that's how I perceived it, because it was opening quite a lot of chapters for me, the non-body death, which I had thought about it, but the way you brought it and articulated, Akilah, was like realizing that I'm grieving the whole of my life. It was like not grieving or grieving the whole time, because I had quite a violent relationship with my mother, and it was my, like the person, the protector, the care provider, daily life. And suddenly I would experience a threat, like physical violence. And a few years ago in a breathwork training, I realized that my first fear of death was through my mother when I was about 12. So now opening this field, I feel quietly confused. This is my state. Like I feel confused, but in a tranquil way of how I relate with that, because it's so close, like it was in my house eventually, in my home. And of course, I know all the problems, in quotes, that it's very hard for me to root. I always change place, city, country, whatever. But on the same time, embracing that, not trying to avoid or run away, or at least not consciously, I don't know. And it has brought up my curiosity in a deeper way of where am I, but sitting silently with that. But I hadn't realized this bipolar, like I'm not grieving or I am grieving since I was born somehow. So it's, yes, thank you for bringing that.
Yo. Hmm. 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 Hey, I weirdly chose to be in an awkward position to create a sense of grief as we move through the closing of this container, or at least this moment. And I can already feel the grief in my own body as I feel this portal, the space here is opening up things that are wanting to be tended to within my own body, within my own spirit, within my own self. And I feel stronger in this first circle with the Zoom thing and this technology doing its thing, and your voices coming through, saying the things, inviting different fields. But yeah, I'm here to honor also the Chronos, the entity of Chronos and time. So maybe if I'm not sure. I can open it up to Akilah if you want to say any last, like, even if it's 3 words, it's a sound, if it's a suggestion for a song, anything, if there's anything that you wish to say as we close today's day.
Yeah, I want to say, just, just, yeah.
Yo, so as we move to the closing of today's session, with 5 minutes left, we want to open up to anyone else to offer maybe not more than 5 words. Also, if there's a suggestion of maybe you can offer a feeling, maybe you can offer, uh, yeah, anything. But I'm inviting not more than 5 words, unless there's a strong spiritual, what's the word? I think, incorporation. Unless there's a spirit that incorporates one of us and that brings through something from another realm, inviting that. But for at least our mortal, rational, irrational selves, grieving selves, not more than 5 words. And you don't have to do it if you're not feeling called to. So just, yeah, inviting your words, this energy to see us out. Okay, everyone. I wanted to give deep gratitude to the named and unnamed griefs that we all are holding. I'm giving deep gratitude to the named and unnamed things that have been said, that should have been said, it didn't get said. Uh, Wanting to honor all of that, wanting to honor the technology, the electricity, the frequency, Earth right now, wherever it is planetarily in conjunction to other planets, wanted to honor the moon, the ocean, the sun, all the microorganisms that make this moment possible, and want to big up the courage it takes to show up for this work. A big, big, big honoring of the deep courage it takes to show up for this deep courage for what it means to be witnessed and witnessed, to be witnessed. And what's the other opposite of it? You guys know what I'm saying. Yeah. I just want to thank you for today. I don't know why. I normally, Akilah, if you don't know, like I'm a part-time DJ in this container. But for some reason, my Zoom, every time like I click play or my Spotify, like it cuts the sound. The sound doesn't hear here. I'll try one more time. I tried like before this to create some welcome music, but I'll try one more time. But if it doesn't play, unfortunately, I've been naming uncertainty, but today I will name grief. The grief for not being able to be the DJ.
It all counts. It's all valid.
So I just want to also give a massive gratitude to you, Akilah, for all the seen and unseen energies that you bring into the space. Big up our relationship and the energy that that has brought us to this moment in time. Big up your companionship, your kinship, and your friendship.
Yes, ditto, spread out.
Uh,
Thank you all so much for allowing me to just rest here with y'all and move through grief tending and all of the other things that come with it, because grief is never solo work. And I really appreciate this deeply because I do this because I need it. And I thank you so much for being available and willing. Muted, Vani.
Sorry about that. Thank you. With that said, I'll be possibly playing a song. There's a possibility that music will happen in this now. If not, just big up for the container. And yeah, I hope to see everyone here in our metabolizing session and integration session next week. I'll also be linking you guys via email with the link of today's session, which I'm sure many of us will go back to. And yeah, looking forward to integrate and metabolize everything up until now in next week Monday session. Big up and thank you all. No, not doing the thing. Not doing the thing.
Shivani, I think it's gotta work for you, man. Because if it works for you, it works for all of us. It's gotta work, man. I'm laughing because I tried to make it work last week and it did not work at all. I failed 100% on all levels. But you are not, no, it's gotta work.